In this video, we're going to try and answer the question about what the different lofts are of the golf clubs in the bag. But before we start, it's important to say we're going to list out what we would describe as a fairly typical lineup in terms of where the lofts would be. But there is a huge amount of variation throughout any golfer's set, and there's a few reasons for that. I'm going to give a couple of examples. So, out on tour, Bryson DeChambeau, probably the fastest swinging tour player there is, he has a driver that's just 7.5 degrees of loft. That helps him to control the flight. Whereas I know there are other players out on tour that carry drivers up to 11.5 degrees of loft. So there's a huge amount of variation there. The basic rule of thumb with the driver is that faster swingers will tend to require a little bit less loft than slower swingers. And then in the irons, there's a big difference as well. So those players who are confident ball strikers that want irons that look really traditional, so either blade-like or very compact to look down on, those irons will often have quite traditional lofts. So they'll be more lofted than irons geared more towards distance. To give you an idea, within the Mizuno range, they have a model called the MP20MB. It's very blade-like in terms of its look. That has an incredibly traditional loft. The 7-iron of that set is 34 degrees. And then Mizuno, on the other end of the spectrum, have an iron model called the JPX 921 Hot Metal, and the 7-iron in that set is just 29 degrees. So that's partly where some of that extra distance comes from through the loft. But because of the construction of the iron, they're able to pull the centre of gravity back, which gets the ball up into the air. So you get a similar ball flight from both sets, but one set goes further than the other. Now, as I said, we're going to list out what a typical kind of lineup would be, but please do take this with a pinch of salt because there are a huge amount of variations here. So, starting with driver, and a typical driver would be somewhere between the kind of 9 to 11 degree mark. A 3-wood would be between the 13 to 15 degrees. A 5-wood would be around about the 18 degree mark. Into hybrids, and a 3 hybrid would be something like a 19 degree, and a 4 hybrid would be about 22 degrees. Now, for the irons, I'm going to list out the lofts of the Ping G425 model because it's a real sort of mass market model, something that suits a whole host of different players because it offers that sort of blend of feel, forgiveness, distance that so many golfers are after. So this is a sort of typical set of irons. So in the Ping G425, the 4-iron is 20.5 degrees, the 5-iron is 23.5 degrees, and the 6-iron is 26.5 degrees. The 7-iron is 30 degrees, the 8-iron is 34.5 degrees, and the 9-iron is 39.5 degrees. The pitching wedge in that set is 44.5 degrees. Now, we're going to move on to the wedges, and again, I'm repeating myself here, but there is a huge amount of variation here. But a typical wedge setup would be a pitching wedge would somewhere be between the kind of 44 to 47 degree mark. A gap wedge would be around about 52 degrees. A sand wedge would be around about 56 degrees, and a lob wedge would be around about 60 degrees. Now, to give you an idea, my wedge setup, my gap wedge is 50 degrees, my sand wedge is 54 degrees, and my lob wedge is 58 degrees. So this is what we would consider to be a fairly standard, if there is such a thing, set of lofts throughout the golf bag. And it's important to say that the key point here is about how even the gaps are throughout the set. That's ultimately what you're looking for to ensure that you don't have any big, giant, gaping distance gaps in your set that can really cost you while you're out on the golf course.